Good evening, my dear Dhamma friends and devotees. In my previous talk, I spoke from a sutta from the Tripitaka, Majjhima Nikaya, that is the middle-length discourse, taught to us by the Arihat Sariputta, which I mentioned about the wholesome and unwholesome acts, and also the roots of wholesome and unwholesome acts, and also the other section in that sutta which is about suffering. Today I selected this discourse from the Satipatthana Sutta to describe and to analyze the truth of suffering, the Dukkha Satya, in detail. So let us see, according to this Satipatthana Sutta, the truth of suffering in detail. Katamancha bhikkhave dukkha ariya satcham. And monks, what is this noble truth of suffering? Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Death is suffering. Grief, lamentation, pain, sadness and despair are suffering. Being attached to the unloved is suffering. Being separated from the loved is suffering. Not getting what one wants is a suffering. In short, the 5 aggregates of grasping are suffering. Now, Katamancha bhikkhave jati, and what monks is birth? The birth of different kinds of beings in the various realms of sentient existence. They are being born, their origination, they are being conceived, they are coming into existence. The manifestation of their aggregates of being and the sense bases. This is called jati, or is birth. This is a suffering, my dear devotees. And monks, what is aging? Katamancha bhikkhave jara. The aging of different kinds of beings in the various realms of sentient existence. They are aged, frail, grey, wrinkled, the declining of their life force, the wearing out of their sense faculties. This is called old age or jara. Katamacha bhikkhave maranam. Now what monks is death? The departing of different kinds of beings in the various realms of sentient existence. They are leaving, they are removal, disappearance, demise, passing away. Dissolution of the aggregates and discarding of the body, the destruction of faculty of life. Idam vucchati bhikkhave maranam. This monks is called death. Katamocha bhikkhave soko. Soko means grief. Now what is grief? The grief arising from this or that loss, or this or that adversity which one encounters, the grieving, the sorrowful state, inner distress, inner mental affection. This monks is called grief. Katamocha bhikkhava paridevo. Now what monks is lamentation? The lamentation arising from this or that loss, or this or that adversity which one encounters. The wail, the lament, the act of wailing and lamenting, the state of wailing and lamenting. Ayam vucchati bhikkhave paridev. This monks is called lamentation. Katamocha bhikkhave dukkha. Now, what monks is pain? Monks, whatsoever there is of bodily pain, bodily unpleasant sensation, the painful and the unpleasant feeling produced by bodily contact, this is also a suffering. This is called pain. Katamocha bhikkave domanassam. Now what, monks, is sadness? Monks, whatsoever there is of mental pain, inner unpleasantness, the painful and the unpleasant feeling occasioned, mental unpleasant feeling occasioned by mental contact, this, monks, is called sadness or domanassa. Katamocha bhikkave upayaso. Now what, monks, is despair? Whatsoever inner distress there is for this or that loss, or that adversity which one encounters, despondency, dejection, the despondent and dejected states of mind, ayam vucchati bhikkave upayasa. This, monks, is called despair. And what, monks, is being attached to the unloved in suffering? Api sampayogo dukkha. Here, however, has unwanted, disliked, unpleasant sight objects, sound, smells, taste, tangibles or mind objects, or whoever encounters these ill wishes, wishes of harm, of discomfort, of insecurity, with whom they have concourse, intercourse, connection, unions, this is called api sampayogo dukkha. Now, monks, what is being separated from the loved is suffering. Piye vipayogo dukkha. Here, whoever has what is wanted, liked, pleasant sight objects, sound, smells, taste, mind objects, or whoever encounters well-wishers, wishers of good, of comfort, of security, mother or father, brother or sister, friends, colleagues or blood relations, and then is deprived of such concourse, intercourses, connections, union, ayam vucchati bhikkave piye vipayogo dukkha. That, monks, is called being separated from the loved is suffering. Now what, monks, is suffering? For not getting what one wishes. Monks, for beings who are subject to birth, this wish arises, oh, that we were not subjected to birth, that no new birth were to come upon us. But this cannot be got merely by wishing in this way. And for not getting this, what one wishes is suffering. Monks, for beings who are subject to old age, this wish arises, oh, that we were not subject to old age. Oh, that no old age were to come upon us. But this cannot be got merely by wishing in this way. And for not getting thus, what one wishes is suffering. Monks, for beings who are subject to disease, this which wish arises, that we were not subject to disease, that no disease were to come upon us, but this cannot be got merely by wishing in this way. And for not getting thus, what one wishes is suffering. Monks, for beings who are subjected to death, this wish arises, that we were not subject to death, that no death were to come upon us, but this cannot be got merely by wishing in this way. And for not getting thus, what one wishes, this is also a suffering. For beings who are subject to grief, lamentation, pain, sadness, despair, this wish arises, oh, that we were not subject to grief, lamentation, pain and despair, that no grief, lamentation, pain, despair were to come upon us. But this cannot be got merely by wishing in this way. And for not getting thus, what one wishes is suffering. Now, monks, is briefly the 5 aggregates of clinging or suffering. They are namely the corporeality, aggregate of clinging, the feeling, aggregate of clinging, the perception, aggregate of clinging, the mental formation, aggregate of clinging, the consciousness, aggregate of clinging. That is Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara and Vijnana. These monks are called briefly the 5 aggregates of clinging, upadana, or suffering. This monks is called the noble truth of suffering. So today, my dear Dhamma friends and devotees, we have analyzed the Dukkha Ariya Satya in detail. What is suffering? Which I chose is in the Satipatthana Sutta. In my previous talks, my dear Dhamma friends, I have spoken about Dukkha, suffering, from the Satipatthana Sutta. Now today we'll see how the Satipatthana Sutta mentions about the Dukkha Samudaya and how Dukkha or unsatisfactoriness or suffering arises within this human being. Now our great teacher, the fully enlightened, all-knowing Gautama Buddha says, Chakkung loke piyarupang satarupang ette satanna uppajjamana uppajjati etta nivisamana nivisati. And this Pali stanza goes on to say, Chakkung sotang ganang jivva kayo mano. That is, Chakku means eye, Sota means ear, Gana means nose, Jivya is tongue, Kayo is body, and Mano is mind. Piyarupang satarupang ette satanna uppajjamana uppajjati etta nivisamana nivisati. Now, my dear devotees, if we analyze this, it says eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. In this world is the delightful and pleasurable things. Here in this eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, this craving finds it congenial to arise and to take roots. Now here, Dukkha arises, Dukkha Samudaya, the rising of Dukkha. And also, Rupa, visible forms, Saddha, sounds, Gandha, smells, Rasa, taste, Pottabha, Dhamma, bodily contacts, mental objects. Here as well, my dear devotees, in this world, through those as well, it is delightful and a pleasurable thing that we find. Here in this craving finds it congenial to arise and to take roots. And also this sutta says, Chakku Vijnana, eye consciousness, Sota Vijnana, ear consciousness, Gana Vijnana, nose consciousness, Jivya Vijnana, tongue consciousness, Kaya Vijnana, body consciousness, Mano Vijnana, mind consciousness. In these, my dear Dhamma friends, in this world is the delightful and pleasurable thing that we find. Through this eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness is where this craving arises, Dukkha Samudaya, that is the suffering arises, and it takes place here. Further it goes on to say, Chakku Sampasso, that is visual impression, Sota sampasso, hearing impressions. Gana sampasso, smelling impressions. Jivya sampasso, tasting impressions. Kaya sampasso, bodily contact impressions. Mano sampasso, mental impressions. With the accumulation of those, my dear Dhamma friends, in this world, the delightful and pleasurable thing arises. What is it? It is the arising of suffering, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha samudaya. Here in this craving finds it congenial to arise and to take roots, my dear Dhamma friends. And also, next we see Chakku sampassaja, that is feeling born of the visual impressions. Sota sampassaja, feeling born of the hearing impressions. Gana sampassaja, feelings born of the smelling impressions. Jivha sampassaja, feelings born of the tasting impressions. Kaya sampassaja, feeling born of the bodily contact impressions. Mano sampassaja, feeling born of the mental impressions. Here, my dear Dhamma friends, feeling born of these visual impressions, that is through the hearing, to the smelling, tasting, bodily contact and the mental impressions. Here as well, craving finds it congenial and it arises through these roots. This is dukkha samudaya, the arising of suffering, the arising of unsatisfactoriness, my dear Dhamma friend. And also if we see rupa sanya, perception of the visual forms. Saddha sanya, perception of the sound. That is, sanya means here perception. Gandha sanya, perceptions of smells. Rasa sanya, perceptions of taste. Pottabha sanya, perceptions of bodily contact, my dear devotees. And also Dhamma sanya, here perceptions of mental objects. Here perceptions, that is sanya, of visible form, sound, smell, taste, bodily contact, perceptions of mental objects. Here this craving finds it congenial to arise and to take roots. My dear Dhamma friends, if we analyze the Satipatthana Dukkha Samudaya, or the arising of suffering, we'll see further Rupa Sanchetana, volition of visible form, my dear devotees. Saddha Sanchetana, volition for sounds. Gandha Sanchetana, volition for smell. Rasa Sanchetana, volition for taste. Pottabha Sanchetana, volition for bodily contact. Dhamma Sanchetana, volition for mental objects. Here, my dear devotees, volition for visible form, volition for sound, volition for smell, volition for taste, volition for bodily contact, volition for mental objects. Here in these the craving finds the root. It arises. What arises? Dukkha, suffering, unsatisfactoriness through these sense organs. The Satipatthana Sutta Dukkha Samudaya goes on to mention Rupa Tanna. Here we come to craving for visible forms. Saddha Tanna, that is craving for sound. Gandha Tanna, craving for smell. Rasa Tanna, craving for taste. Pottabha Tanna, craving for bodily contact. Dhamma Tanna, craving for mental objects. So here, if we analyze this, craving for visible forms, craving for sound, craving for smell, craving for taste, craving for bodily contact, craving for mental objects, when all these come together, it can be individually, or the addition of these, still it finds in this world that is delightful and it is a pleasurable thing. This craving finds it congenial to arise and to take roots in the being. So here, craving through these forms, smells, sounds, tastes, body contact and mental objects, what arises? Dukkha, suffering. Then the next point here is the rupa vitakko. Now here the vitakko means the thought conception of visible form. Saddha vitakko, thought conception of sound. Then gandha, this is the conception of smell. Rasa vitakko, the thought arises for the conception of taste. Pottabba vitakko, bodily contact, the conception of bodily contact. Dhamma vitakko, thought conception of mental objects. Now here in this, my dear Dhamma friends, what in this? The thought conception of visible forms, of sound, smell, taste, bodily contact, mental objects. Here this craving finds it congenial to arise and to take root. What to arise, my dear devotees? It is dukkha, unsatisfactoriness or suffering. Finally, the sutta mentions rupa vicharo, pondering of visible forms. Now we come to pondering. Rupa vicharo loke piyarupang satarupang ette satanna uppajjamana uppajjati etta nivisamana nivisati. So rupa vicharo, pondering of visible forms, pondering of sound, pondering of smell, pondering of taste, pondering of bodily contact, pondering of mental objects. Now here, my dear devotees, in this world, this is delightful. Some, we see it as delightful and pleasurable. But here, this craving finds it congenial to arise and to take root. What to take root, my dear devotees? Suffering, dukkha. So the Buddha has taught us, control your five senses. Now what we see, it roots in. What we hear, it goes through our sound consciousness. So that is why the Buddha mentions Chakkuloke piyarupang satarupang. So my dear Dhamma friends, remember, all this craving is started and rooted within us. That is why the great teacher mentions, control your five senses. Chakkuncha paticca rupe uppacchati chakku vinyana. Now when this eye sees, has the contact with the visible form, the eye consciousness arises. Through that, suffering, dukkha arises. So there, we got to control our minds. We got to put a halt to this craving. So the Buddha goes on to say, within this fathom-long body. So when we take all these forms from our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, from our mental objects, we take these. Remember, my dear Dhamma friends, don't let any outside thing or an outside individual affect your happiness inside. The Buddha says, look within thy fathom long body. Api chahang avuso imasmin eva viyama matte kalebare. Sasanya himi samaneke lokancha panchappe. Loka samodayancha, loka nirodhancha, loka nirodha gaminiyancha patipada. Now here the Buddha says, within this fathom long body, don't look elsewhere. Control your mind. Within this fathom long body, my dear devotees, is suffering, unsatisfactoriness or dukkha. The cause, the arising of this suffering, which I have just spoken about, the dukkha samudaya satya in the Satipatthana Sutta. So the suffering, the arising of this dukkha or suffering, and also the abandoning, the extinction of this suffering, and the path to end this suffering is not in the outer world, my dear devotees. So don't think or look at the outer world. It is within thy fathom long body. So my dear Dhamma friends, this evening we have analyzed through the Satipatthana Sutta what our great teacher, the fully enlightened, all-knowing Gautama Buddha has taught us about the arising of dukkha, dukkha samudaya, and how it takes place within us. So remember, my dear Dhamma friends, don't let any outside thing, a force or an individual affect your inner happiness. Then what happens is the dukkha arises. So understand, know your mind, control and tame your mind, and finally free your mind from dukkha. Thank you very much. May all beings meet with success. I take this great opportunity this evening to thank the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation for giving me this opportunity to give a talk, a Buddhist talk, that our great teacher, the fully enlightened 28th Gautama Buddha, has taught us. Now, in my last talk, I have mentioned through the Satipatthana Sutta how dukkha arises, the dukkha samudaya satya, the arising of this unsatisfactoriness or dukkha. Now today let me take this opportunity to give this Buddhist talk about the abandoning and the extinction of this dukkha through the Satipatthana Sutta. Now our great teacher, the Buddha, shows us, now dukkha samudaya, the arising of dukkha is through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. The same way, my dear devotees, the abandoning, the extinction of this dukkha is also through this same eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. So if we analyze the dukkha nirodha satya, that is the abandoning or the extinction of dukkha, it goes on to say, Chakkung loke piyarupang satarupang ette sa tanna pahiyamana pahiyati etta nirujjamana nirujjati. Now see, my dear Dhamma friends, here in this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. Through what? Chakku, eye, sota, ear, gana, nose, jivha, tongue, kayo, that is body, and mano, mind. Now here, this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. So my dear Dhamma friends, the Satipatthana Sutta goes on to mention Rupa, visible forms, Saddha, sounds, Gandha, smells, Rasa, taste, and Pottabha, bodily contacts, Dhamma, mental objects. Herein this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. So you abandon this. Now, how do you abandon this? When you take these visible forms, sounds, smells, tastes, bodily contacts, mental objects, you see it as it is. You don't take it into your mind and root it. Make it be rooted deep down inside, where dukkha arises. Herein this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. For example, when you see your mother, when you see your father, when you see your husband, wife, children, your loved ones, through visible forms, through the eye contact, chakkuncha paticca rupe uppacchati chakku vinyana. Through your ears, when you see them, when you hear them, the craving arises. So you have to see it as it is. You have to hear it as it is. And you have to remember that everything is not permanent, it is in a state of flux. So with this right understanding and proper thinking, this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. Nobody can do it for you. Atta deepa viharati atti patisarana. That is, man is the weaver of his own web. Man is the architect of his own fortune. So we have to do it ourselves. The next point is dukkha nirodha, or the extinction. The abandoning of this dukkha comes through chakku vinyana. That is eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. Here, this craving is effectively abandoned by one and is made extinct. The next point, chakku sampasso, visual impression, hearing impression, smelling impression, tasting impression, bodily contact impression, mental impression. Herein, my dear devotees, from this, from what? Visual impression, hearing impression, smelling impression, tasting impression, bodily impression, mental impression, this craving is effectively abandoned. Then, chakku sampassaja, feeling born of the visual impression, feeling born of the hearing impression, feeling born with the smelling impression, the tasting impression, the contact impression, the mental impression. Here also, my dear devotees, this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct with the proper understanding of one's wisdom. Our next point here in the Satipatthana Sutta, it mentions Rupa Sanya, perception of visible form, perception of sound, Saddha Sanya, Gandha Sanya, perception of smell, perception of taste, perception of bodily contact, perception of mental object. Herein as well, my dear devotees, craving is effectively abandoned and extinct. Through what? Through the perception of form, sound, smell, taste, bodily contact and mental objects. Then the next point in the Satipatthana Sutra, it mentions Rupa Sanchetana, volition. Chetana is volition. That is why the Buddha says, O monks, may I say to you, volition is kamma. Chetanam bhikkave kammang vadami. There. But here is Rupa Sanchetana. Volition for visible form. Volition for sound. Volition for smell. Volition for taste. Volition for bodily contact. Volition for mental objects. That is Chetana. Herein through these, through what? Form, sound, smell, taste, body contact, mental objects. The volition for these. Herein as well, my dear Dhamma friends, craving is effectively abandoned and put aside. It doesn't have the opportunity to arise. But for this, you have to see it through wisdom. Then comes craving for visible forms, rupa tanna. Craving for sound, saddha tanna. Craving for smell, gandha tanna. Craving for taste, rasa tanna. Craving for bodily contact, pottabha tanna. And craving for mental objects, dhamma tanna. From these, my dear Dhamma friends, craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. Through what? Craving for these visible forms. You put a hold to this craving. You don't take it into you. You see it with wisdom. You see the impermanency, and you see how you will be affected with dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, if you absorb these craving. Through what? Through the visible form, sound, smell, taste, body contact and mental objects. And also rupa vitakko. Now here comes, my dear devotees, what comes? The thought conception of visible form. Saddha vitakko, thought conception of sound. Gandha vitakko, thought conception of smell. Rasa vitakko, thought conception of taste. Pottabha vitakko, thought conception of bodily contact. Dhamma vitakko, thought conception of mental objects. Here as well, my dear devotees, this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. That is, the Buddha goes on to say, Rupa vitakko loke piya rupang sata rupang ette satanna pahiyamana pahiyati etta nirujjamana nirujjati. This craving is effectively abandoned and put aside. Finally, Rupa vicharo, pondering of these visible forms, my dear devotees, remember. Pondering of sound, saddha vicharo. Pondering of smell, gandha vicharo. Pondering for taste, rasa vicharo. Pondering of the bodily contact, pottabha vicharo. Then dhamma vicharo, pondering of mental objects. Here also the Buddha mentions how it arises, that is dukkha samudaya, and how it is abandoned. Rupa vicharo loke pirupang satarupang. Ette satanna pahiyamana pahiyati etta nirujjamana nirujjati. So, my dear Dhamma friends, this craving is effectively abandoned and made extinct. Now, how do we do this? How do we do this, my dear Dhamma friends? Not to have craving, not to bring dukkha. Remember, the Buddha mentions and teaches chakkuncha paticca rupe uppacchati chakku vinyana. Don't let this craving get deep down rooted in you. When it's rooted, dukkha arises, suffering arises, my dear Dhamma friends. So, remember, apichahang avuso imasmin eva kiyama mate kalebere. In this fathom long body lies suffering, the cause, then the way to end suffering and the path to end suffering. So finally, know, understand your mind, tame your mind, and free your mind. Thank you very much. May all beings be well and happy.